Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of AnchorPoint. This is in our fourth season, and this is episode number 2, and I've got with me Kevin Porter today. Say hi, Kevin.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, this is a great conversation. If you missed our first one, we chatted with Missy, and it is on our site or wherever you get your podcasts. This one is equally engaging. I'm really stoked to talk to Kevin today. Let me kind of tell you how this worked. I actually gave Kevin permission, right, to talk about whatever you wanted to talk about.
Kyle, I would say you sort of tricked me into the podcast. He came in my office. He said, Kevin, I'm doing a podcast. What's something that you think that people maybe around your age, a little younger, a little older, would want to hear about? So I just start talking, giving him some help. Get the end of my little brainstorm session. He goes, that's great. Would you like to do a podcast with me? I said, well, I can't say no now. So here I am, but I'm actually really excited. The topic's been very thought-provoking for me.
Yeah, it's a genius tactic.
It was. It's very smart.
You can admit that. It's okay. It's okay. No, we're going to talk about escapism today.
Yeah.
Not escape rooms. You ever done an escape room?
I've done one before, actually. Yes.
They're a little frightening to me, and I have no desire.
Yeah.
But aren't there escape room movies?
There are. It's become such a trend that they've made, obviously, horror movies about, real escape rooms that have high consequences. I don't even like the ones that have low consequences.
No, see that I don't really want to watch those movies, and I don't really want to do escape rooms. We're not talking about escape rooms. We're talking about escapism, and I think that's probably for a lack of any better word. The idea is that we are in a different sort of pandemic, maybe rather than COVID. We are in a pandemic of escapism.
Yeah.
We run away from reality and indulge ourselves in technology, social media, Netflix and Disney Plus and shows. So this was, I think, a very astute topic. Not only it is, I think, really astute for millennials and younger, but I would dare say that it's a topic that's going to hit everybody a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think bringing Kevin here in this conversation, because Kevin, by the way, is the student minister here at the First Colony Church. I don't even know if I said this, but my name's Kyle. So in case I didn't tell you that at the front end, my name's Kyle Strickland. I'm your host. But having Kevin and I are colleagues and friends here at the First Colony Church, having him as our student minister gives us, I think, a unique insight, not only to just students, but can we say this on a podcast, that maybe even to family trends and parental trends?
Yeah. And
I don't think we're necessarily going to go there, but I think I spent some time in student ministry, and it's a unique window.
Yeah.
That you get to minister into this window and it's really a very small window in people's lives, but it's really large to them at the time. So having this as a topic and having Kevin here to experientially speak into this, I think, is going to be quite valuable. So buckle up, everybody. This is going to be a really great conversation. Thanks for joining us today. And let's get started. Kevin, here's the first question. What was the first show you ever watched?
I was a late adopter to the show 24. So when 24 first started airing, people would go nuts because the show, the entire season, is built on one day in the life of Jack Bauer, this secret agent type guy. And every week you would get to see an hour of this day. And so the episode happens in quote unquote real time. And you'd get to the end of the episode on a cliffhanger. It's funny how there was always some cliffhanger at the end of every hour of his real day. And you'd have to wait a whole week to see what happened in the next hour. Well, Darcy and I got to this, Darcy, my wife, we got to this show late in the game, so we just bought the DVD, and we could watch the whole thing straight through, and I'm not kidding. We didn't have cable at the time, and so, that's what we had. We would watch episode upon episode upon episode, and we'd eventually have to tell ourselves we have to get some sleep because we could have just kept watching had time permitted. Yeah.
So how many seasons of 24 did you watch?
I think there's 8. And we had, it was before streaming, and I don't even know if 24 is on streaming, but we had all 8 DVD sets, and we would just plug a DVD in. Each one had 3 or 4 episodes on it. We'd switch it out. You knew it was a binging night if we had to switch from one DVD to another because we finished an entire, 4 episodes or something.
So you binged it. So in other words, you didn't just do an episode at a time.
Oh, no. It was almost impossible to. It was by the end of watching the seasons, all 8 of them, I finally figured out the trick that if you didn't want to binge or go further, you had to stop the episode in the middle because that's when there's the least drama, is right in the middle of the episode. So if you need to go to bed, stop it at the 30-minute mark, because if you get to the hour mark, that's when the entire storyline is coming to its like climax of what's going to happen. So if you really needed to go to bed, just stop midway and pick up there the next day was the lesson I learned.
I watched 24. It was but I don't think I ever binged it. I think I actually watched it every Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Back in the day, it came on after American Idol or something weird.
Yeah.
I think this was back in the day. The first show I ever binged was House MD.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. This is True Confessions here. Hugh Laurie is the star of that show. 9 seasons, I think. At the time, and I don't remember exactly why. I don't even remember the years that it came on television. But there was something that kept me from watching it. I don't remember what it was. And I wouldn't even say that I was remotely interested in it. That's not fair. But I maybe caught an episode or two. But when it was streamable on Netflix, and I would probably say I was an early adopter of streaming things on Netflix. I think if you remember back in the day, you rented discs, CDs or DVDs, I'm sorry, from Netflix. And we did that. But I remember that the perk of being a member of Netflix was also having access to their digital catalog, which was early on. And not a lot of people did that.
No.
So I remember kind of finding my way there and thinking, well, this is kind of cool. And early on, it was a bunch of old movies, but later on, it was like shows like House. And so I remember watching it. But here's the weird thing. I think we'll probably touch on this in a minute. I wouldn't say I was necessarily entertained by it, although obviously I was to an extent. But I streamed it at a really tough time in my life.
Okay.
So it was true escapism. And Father of the Year here, I remember sitting in my living room while my family was doing one thing and I was watching it with earbuds on my tablet. I didn't have an iPad. It was a Android tablet, and I was streaming it on there. And knowing at the time, if we're going to do True Confessions, that I probably shouldn't have been doing this. But if you remember early on, there was really no paradigm for this, and you didn't really know what you were getting into. And to me, there was a novelty of it. I would wake up in the morning and I would stream an episode, and then I would go to bed that night. So I wouldn't call it binging like episodes in a row, but all of my downtime was spent watching this show.
Yeah.
And it's intriguing. It's a good show. Now, since I've binged my fair share of. What's the last show you've binged?
The last show that I binged was The Blacklist. So it comes on every week, but we had missed a season or something like that in there. We really like it with James Spader. And so we had a whole season that we could just do off of cable, the streaming services that they had. And oh my gosh, we watched the whole season in a weekend. It was crazy. Like, we just had nothing to do that weekend, and we probably watched a couple Friday night, and then a bunch Saturday, and then we had a few left on Sunday. And by the end of it, we were like, "Are we regretting this decision?" And both of us kind of like, "No, like that was awesome. Like, we loved the experience of it." So it's like, that's the true confession of me is I don't think we quite know where we're going to land as a society or individuals on this topic of binging. We've kind of recognized some trends or patterns in ourselves, like you were saying about it, but I don't think we quite know where this is going to land exactly. It's not been long enough in my mind to know.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was. Now, I don't binge things anymore. Now, it's very episodic. If I'm watching, The Office, I'll watch an episode here or there. I think because intuitively I can't binge a show anymore. I'm just almost too tired to even think about that. Like, I don't know what that does. And it's kind of, it hurts my eyes. There's just all kinds of weirdness to it. But early on, so maybe I probably view binging differently than you.
It sounds a little bit different.
Yeah, because you would watch them straight through, and I was the downtime. I would do it, but as soon as I had a moment, going to bed at night or getting up in the morning when life wasn't so hectic with little kids at home, that's when I would experience that. And what else I noticed in this experience is that as the streaming services became more available, I don't necessarily have the same entertainment tastes as my family.
Yeah. So
we may be watching and streaming and binging different things at the same time. Sometimes, maybe not, but it's created this dichotomy where I don't necessarily watch what they watch, and they don't really watch what I watch, and we don't really want to watch what each other's. But you and your wife Darcy, that's pretty common. You binge stuff together.
Yeah, but we have the same dynamic that you're talking about, where there's stuff that she likes to watch every episode of that's not even like a storyline. She just wants to capture every single thing that happened on an HGTV show. And for me, at this point, it's not even so much shows that I binge. To me, it's other devices we'll get into, of whether it's social media or types of information on there, or video games even, like the amount of time. Darcy and I have different tastes, and that's kind of interesting dynamic of community, is we have so many options that you have to navigate. Darcy and I basically have an agreement that we will do something together every night, because our tastes can be different enough that we might not want to do the exact same things. So it's almost like a relational commitment that every evening we'll do something together, because otherwise, we might want totally different things of how to rest or relax that evening.
So you hit something there. We've kind of opened our conversation with binging episodic television shows.
Yeah.
It's not the only thing that can be binged.
Sure. Yeah.
Though, right? So I've got a couple of statistics here, and I know you've got some anecdotes to kind of play into this, but the average American adult, this is adult, so I'm assuming this is over 18, today spends about 4 hours and 30 minutes watching shows and movies on television. So I'm assuming on television means not on Netflix or Disney Plus. That's my assumption.
Yeah.
Here's a couple others. The average American, get this one. This is almost alarming, and you're almost offended when you hear it, but then you think, yeah, that's probably right. The average American spends about 10 hours and 39 minutes of on-screen time every day. So that includes smartphones, tablets, video games, computers, multimedia devices, televisions, radios, DVRs, and DVDs.
Yeah.
10, and I sorry I said the word actually twice, seen a statistic very similar, that the average American consumes over 11 hours of data every day.
Yeah.
Now, assuming that we get 8 hours of sleep a night, that means that we're awake for 18 hours, 16 hours a day. So the majority of our day, 50, 60, 70% of our day is spent on a screen.
Yeah.
Isn't that alarming?
Yeah, but when you think about it, there's some days that are different when you have an event planned. I think, imagine if you got kids' events, this takes away from time, although you got to say how many parents are sitting in the stands on their screen still at that point. But if you don't have anything planned for the night, how many things do people engage in that aren't screen-oriented?
That's a good point.
It's like you come home, and what else are people filling their time with? So that's what I've been trying to do in preparation for this conversation, is to withhold judgment on whether or not I'm, like you said, offended by that number in my own life. Because if you just judge it straight away, I don't know if we're going to dig down to really but why are we doing this? Is this something that is bothersome? And if it is, why? What are the aspects of it that are maybe neutral or maybe even positive? Some people might argue. So it's like I've kind of had to suspend judgment on some of these shocking stats. Because for me, for example, I went and looked at my screen time. You can go do that if you own an iPhone, I know. I think Android has a similar option. And on Sundays at 9 o'clock, I'll be getting ready for a class with the teenagers to come up in the D wing, and it'll pop up an alert that says your screen time is up or down X% from the previous week. It'll give me a report. So I got a report this last Sunday. It said your screen time is down 12%. I'm like, that's good. I instinctually think that that's a positive thing. It says you're down to 4 hours and 32 minutes a day of screen time on your phone.
Oh my
goodness. I was shocked by it, because that doesn't even include when I'm watching TV. That doesn't include if I'm playing a video game. That doesn't even include a lot of the screen time that could be had. That's just my phone alone.
So you get a notification that tells you that you're up or down.
Yeah.
Depending upon a week-to-week basis.
Oh, yeah, and I've asked some students about it when I figured out that you can go check this information out on your own device. I started asking them some of it. And most teenagers that I talked to were actually kind of around my amounts. There were several in a row that were kind of we're all in the 4 to 5 hour a day category. But I had a high school boy, lest you think it's a gender thing, I had a high school boy that he had in the summertime 16 hours a day averaged for the week that we checked on. I had a high school girl just this last week that said I have 11 hours a day. And I'm like, that means at school even, like you're even on your phone. She's like, oh yeah, absolutely.
So that's on their phone.
That's just the phone, which I think for students is probably the majority of it. That'd be an interesting thing. I've not actually asked them, how much time do you sit in front of a TV? That might be more of a generational thing. But I think the majority of students, it's on their phone, whereas adults probably have a variety of things just from, I don't know if it's nostalgia to sit on a couch and watch a TV or not. But
it's not nostalgia. Sometimes it's nice.
Yeah.
I've got another statistic here. Maybe you can kind of think about this since you're a student minister. But you've already kind of alluded to this, that American teenagers spend an average of 9 hours a day in front of screens. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean their phone. That's for any screen at all. Now, before you move into that direction, because I want to get your take on that, I remember a few years ago, when I was sort of seeing the trend of people on their phones, I decided to do something called, you ever heard of a media fast? You ever heard of that? So I was doing some media fasts, and I had some adults. So there were students involved and college students, but I had the adults come to me, and because I kind of couched it as stay off of your screen. I kind of was seeing early on this trend several years ago, this trend of people being sort of locked into a device. But I had some dads, some business guys said, that's impossible for me. I work on my laptop. And I remember at that moment thinking we're in a weird spot, because even though we want to divulge from media, that's not always possible, the immediate accessibility. So when you think about a statistic of an American teenager spending an average of 9 hours a day in front of screens, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think some of that is the integration of technology into schools and into schoolwork. But the thoughts where I've been having is, if you were to remove that aspect, I don't know the stat on that. I know a kid's phone is usually not something that they're using for schoolwork, so that was almost a little bit more of okay, I can kind of see the escapism aspect of technology. And so I asked a couple of kids this last week in preparation for our conversation today, I said, hey, don't defend it or don't belittle yourself. I just kind of want to know, pure and raw reaction, why do you get on your phone? Like, in the moment that you pull your phone out, why do you do it? And one student was saying, well, I've just been so busy at school that when I get home, like, I want to get a mental break. Because we were talking about the screen time. He said, oh, the majority of that happens right after I get home from school. And so I just kind of kept digging. I said, okay, you need a mental break. I can really relate to that because that's what happens to me as well. So why do you need a mental break? And when they said, well, I kind of want to, they didn't use the word escape, but that's the idea they were communicating. They said, I just kind of want to get away from all of the pressures and stress that I feel during the day, whether that's relational, whether that's academic. Some of it could be the athletics or the other organizations that they're a part of that they're really trying to strive and excel in. So I just want to escape. And so I go to this because it kind of can entertain me, you know? And so I was kind of digging a little bit deeper. I was like, so why a phone? You know, like, there's a lot of ways you can entertain yourself. Why a phone? And she said, because it's the easiest way for me to entertain myself. And I got to thinking about that. It's like, you know, what would you more enjoy, sitting on your phone or going and sitting on a beach? And most people say, like, oh, well, I'm going to go to a beach, or maybe it's some other place for you. But, like, do you know how much work it takes to get to the beach? You have to plan for weeks in advance. You've got to make sure that the calendar is free. You got to make sure that you've got about half day at the least available. You got to pack up the car. You got to make sure you've got food. You got to get set up on the beach. Then you got to clean up, all for maybe 3 or 4 hours, the same amount of screen time that a person's going to use on average if they're an adult. There's so much work that goes into the beach, whereas you could just pull out your phone. And in terms of the experience of I'm entertained, I'm enjoying something that allows me to get out of the stresses of my life, the phone is so easy to use. It has become like an incredibly accessible way to let my mind check out. I don't even have to go anywhere. I can do it in between a commercial break, you know, of something that I'm distracted within a distraction. It's distraction inception, you know. It's like my wife will be fast forwarding through the commercials, which is already such a luxury. And in that 10 seconds, like, I'll find myself instinctually pulling my phone out to check something on ESPN, you know. And so I think it's just so easy to get that relief from the stresses of our life, the phone just gives us that.
So we're talking about phones, but that's not. So in this idea of escaping and binging, we've touched on this. There are other ways to do this. I just pulled this up. The 2021's most streamed TV show in the U.S. You know what it was? You want to take a guess?
I mean, my guess would be The Office.
2021. No.
What was it?
Criminal Minds. A procedural show from CBS.
Okay.
And but here, check this out. The most streamed original content. In other words, Netflix, Disney Plus make their own content.
Yeah.
You want to know what the most streamed original TV show was in 2021? It's on Netflix. It's Lucifer.
Interesting. I've seen that. I've actually watched a few episodes about this, so I'm familiar with the show. I didn't know it was that popular.
I didn't either. But Lucifer was the most streamed original. And they've got numbers here. So Criminal Minds was streamed an estimated 33.9 billion minutes last year.
I don't even know how to quantify that, but
I don't either.
It's a lot.
I have no idea. But to give you some perspective, Lucifer was streamed 18.3 billion minutes.
Wow.
So Criminal Minds, that's I wouldn't have expected that one. I've never seen either of those shows. I think The Office took the number one spot in 2020, which, by the way, is when I became introduced to The Office during COVID and lockdown. I had never seen the show, and like most people, kind of finding myself feel like you're in a boat in the middle of the ocean. You don't really know which way to go in that season, and I thought, well, let's try this again. My wife and I actually tried the show years ago, and then we dropped it. And I don't know if I just couldn't. It wasn't approachable to me, but this time around, it's become a little more approachable. And I've watched it a few times. I'm not going to say here publicly how often or how much I've watched, but I think The Office took, which would have been right, because that's when I started watching it.
You're a part of that stat.
I am part of that stat.
Yeah.
So you said something about smartphones. I want to kind of bring up some interesting data. So Cherie Melumad is an assistant professor of marketing at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, and she studies the relationship between people and their phones. And she came by this because it says when she was working on her doctorate, she found herself reaching for her phone in 2012. So now she has made this a particular study. And let me give you one of the ways that she has studied this. She's published 5 studies, and they're co-written with Michael Tuan Pham, who is a professor of business at Columbia University. So listen to one of these studies. So they randomly selected subjects, and they assigned them a stressful or a stress-inducing task. And the task was that they were to write a speech that they would have to recite by memory later.
Okay. So
the subjects come in and they think this is what the study is for. So again, it's designed to produce stress. And they assigned others a completely banal, neutral task. So the folks who had the neutral task were the control group.
Yeah. And
the people who were asked, and they didn't know what they were being asked, but they were being asked to recite a speech were the ones being studied. So after or in the process of them writing this speech, they asked this subject group to take a break. They were going to leave them alone, and while they were alone, there was a hidden camera in the room, and this camera was videotaping these subjects who were involved in the stress-inducing task. The speechwriters, what they found was that the speechwriters were more likely than the low-stress control group to grab their phones first before anything else that they brought with them. Listen to this. In fact, they went for their phones in about 24 seconds or less compared with those in the low-stress control group, who waited about 90 seconds before reaching their phones, if they even went for them at all. By the way, that's a quote from an article, "Are Smartphones Serving as Adult Pacifiers?" written by Marlene Simmons from the Washington Post. So, in other words, this is not a trend that maybe as pastors we're noticing. Mm-hmm. There is a legitimate thing happening in society that people, whether they use their phones or not, are seemingly connected to them and drawn to them. You seen anything like that?
Oh, yeah, and you see in a lot of things. I mean, that's sort of the thing that I've noticed about myself is this is the way, I'll use the word from the article, we're pacifying our stress. And we'll get to that later of, all right, if this isn't the best way, what are the ways that maybe we might go about dealing with our stress instead? And we'll try not to be preachy about it. We want it to be more conversation and thought-provoking. But, yeah, I definitely see that, you know. I mean, there's all sorts of things that I think that we want to get away from the stress of our life, and the phone the easiest way. But think about it. There's all sorts of other things that people do. I mean, how many sports fanatics are out there, and there's no impact on our life when our sports team wins or loses. But you're going to see a variety of emotional responses to that, you know. Some of that, maybe people just say they're fanatics and they move on quickly. But, you know, sports is a great example of you see the emotions that come out in a person that's probably about some other aspect of their life. And sports has become this high-risk, high-reward pacifier. And that's why I think we're so upset when our sports team doesn't win, because I was going to this to hopefully get a good feel. And when my team does win, it's like, oh, you finally gave me what I wanted, you know. And that's why some people hate sports, because it's too finicky of a source of relief in that. But I've thought about other things. Like, I've been trying to brainstorm, is this just a technology thing, the pacifying, the escaping of things? And I was thinking about some other categories that I have found myself escaping to. Some of the things that are sort of technology related we've mentioned about social media or video games or whatnot. But what about things that you would typically say, oh, these are things that God really loves? So categories: social justice, categories: involvement in politics and caring about your community through that, compassion with world events that are going on. You know, this is a touchy thing, so I'm going to avoid accusations, but instead just ask everyone to kind of think about their own hearts, because this is where my heart has been. You know, sometimes I wonder if my passion about politics or about a social issue, is that on par with how much I care about the things that are going on in my real life? So really what I'm asking that, am I essentially escaping the problems of my life by adopting problems of somebody else's life? And so is that another way that we escape into a world that has nothing to do with my problems, and therefore it's not as stressful? And it's very easy, it can even be self-righteous for me, I know, to say, but I'm thinking about things that matter, or I'm caring about things that matter. But in reality, how many families would say, oh my gosh, I'm so sick of my dad talking about politics? Well, it might not just be because they don't like the subject, but it might be because that's all you ever talk about, you know? Or you don't really talk about the things that are going on in my life, the problems that God has placed in front of us. But instead, I'm just talking to my wife about things that have to do with some other place in the world. And so that's something that I've had to like kind of check myself, especially through COVID, when it felt like a worldwide thing after a worldwide thing, or a social thing after social thing. And you're trying to navigate, all right, where does a Christian fall in line with this? But the question I've asked on the backside of this is that actually me just escaping the responsibilities that God has put right in front of me to love God and to love my neighbors, you know? And so that's been a bit of a thought-provoking one, because it bucks the trend of just saying technology bad, and so let's get rid of phones, or, you know, like you were mentioning, I'm going to go on a social media fast, or I'm going to get rid of it completely. You know, I think escapism, it permeates into things that we might not even recognize as hard to overcome.
And I think you're right. So we're kind of beating up on smartphone use.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily fair.
Uh-huh.
I think everyone has legitimate needs and uses for smartphones. I think we're all in a category where we, after some self-awareness and self-reflection, would probably admit that we could use with less time on our smartphones. But it's accessible, it's incredibly convenient, and we generate a relationship, at least our connection with the world, through that device. But it's not the only way. But it certainly is a filter for data and information. Just as we're talking, I pulled up some stats on gaming, because gaming is not a phone issue.
Yep.
It is. This is the latest stats. It's just to tell you how I got it. I Googled time spent gaming. That's it. First thing that popped up was from a website called Marketing Charts. It said those Americans who are gaming are doing so more than ever. This is a direct quote from the Google search. Likely as a result of the pandemic, time spent gaming jumped from an average of 12.7 hours a week in 2019 to 14.8 hours a week in 2020. And that's the latest data I could find.
Yeah.
But the point is that time jumped in 1 year pretty significantly, I would say.
Oh, and I can attest to that personally speaking. Growing up as a kid, I loved video games. My mom would come up and it's past bedtime and I'm still playing a video game. She'd say, hey, Kevin, it's time to go to bed. And I would not even realize what time it was. That hasn't changed. I'm 36 years old, and Darcy does the exact same thing. And she says I just get lost in this world. And I've recognized, yeah, I kind of do, and I kind of like getting lost and getting outside of my world, especially if it's in the evening and I've already decided to put down the problems of my day and to rest. But if it hits 12 o'clock at night, which is pretty late, especially for most people, and I'm not doing something that I enjoy, I turn into a pumpkin. I'm ready to fall asleep, and I could be out by 12:10, easy. If I'm playing a video game late at night, it could get to 3 o'clock, and I wouldn't even notice that I was tired. There's something about escaping into a world of a video game for me that I can say, yeah, it's entertaining enough. I'm enjoying being outside of my life and in this other world for probably a variety of reasons. It's controllable, it's pausable, it's restartable, all those things I've thought of. But yeah, I definitely think I've known friends that they picked up video games for the first time in their adult life from the pandemic because I didn't have to wake up the next day and worry about getting to a certain time. So I just had an opportunity to do it where I wouldn't have otherwise, So
I used to play. I don't game much anymore, but I really loved the Madden games.
Yeah.
And I remember, so I don't know exactly how the Madden games work now, but let's go back 15, 18, 20 years or so. You could kind of speed through the games and the seasons. I don't know if you can still do that.
Yeah,
but you'd play the ones you want to play, and you'd speed through the other ones and you could always kind of restart until you made the Super Bowl.
Exactly.
And then you play the Super Bowl, maybe. And I remember doing that on a loop one time. And you become like the general manager of your team.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of how you are. And I decided in one specific instance to play to the end of the game. I thought, well, let's just see what happens. Can I be the general manager forever and ever?
Yeah.
And it got to the 30th year of me being a general manager, and I played through it and won my 30th Super Bowl.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
You're an amazing general manager.
I was really good. And I thought, okay, what happens? And you know what happened? The game restarted. I went back to nothing. Yeah. I mean, there was year zero, year one. And I remember, this is going to sound like I'm ultra super spiritual, and I don't mean to sound that way. But I looked at that and I thought, okay, what do I have to show for what just happened?
Yeah.
I feel really good, but I can't really brag about it. Nobody cares. And I won't go as far as to say that I wasted time.
Sure.
But I'll walk to that line, because what I did in a little self-reflection was all of the time that I was spent doing this, there was no payoff here. What could I have been doing in that amount of time? And from that day, I've not really gamed much since then. And it was more of now I'm not going to, prior to that, I played Metal Gear Solid. It was one of the first ones I played. I think I played it on maybe a PlayStation, one of the earlier PlayStations. Uh-huh. And I would play that for a while. And that was legitimately maybe the only game I've ever beaten. But since the Madden experience, and I think it was sort of a perfect storm of a lot of things in my life. I was a new dad, and I just thought, I don't know if I can justify this experience anymore.
Yeah.
But gaming is a form of escapism. Some people do actually make money playing games. True. So it's not gaming's not a bad thing. But in our conversation in terms of escapism, I think there's some self-reflection that I think is pretty healthy. How much time? I mean, we beat up on cell phones a little bit, but I think, can you walk us, we're going to get to this. So I'm going to ask you in a minute to walk us through how to check your screen time.
Yeah.
And maybe if you're a mom or a dad, how to check your kids' screen time. Sure. But there's an escapism with phones. There's an escapism with games. There's an escapism with politics and social justice, which I thought was a really valid point. We've become lost in what essentially can sound very righteous things, caring about other people's problems at the expense of our own, which is incredibly valid. So let's kind of restart it and try to figure out this phone thing. So if we want to check how much screen time, how do we do that? I am a Samsung guy, and it's different with me. So you're an iPhone person. How do you check that?
The first thing I said, you can Google it for whatever device you've got, and it will be able to walk you through it. But
you can Google it on your cell phone.
You could, exactly. And I know for me, it's very easy on the iPhone. You go to settings, and it's like the 8th thing down, screen time. And then it's going to show you your daily average for that week. But if you want to see other weeks, you click the button right below the chart, and it will say see all activity. And then from there, you can actually, on the chart itself, swipe to the left, and you can go back several weeks and see what your averages are. So, I've got 4 hours and 22 minutes one week, 3 hours and 53 minutes another week. The other cool thing you can check is which apps did you use the most. A really interesting one is how many times did you pick up your phone to check something during the day. So I had a week where I averaged 87 times a day I picked up my phone to check something. It's kind of crazy to think about, but if you just start watching yourself, you might pick it up to look at the time. You might pick it up to look at a text message that comes through. There's a lot of moments during the day wherever things. And you can also check notifications, which mine is actually relatively low, but notifications is a big thing too, because every app you use, every organization that's got something online, they would love to notify you about stuff and get you hooked back into whatever it is that's making them money and being monetized. And so notifications are a huge thing as well about how much am I being interrupted to say, come back, look at me,
So you can find that out on your phone,
Yeah.
how many times or your notifications.
Yeah, I got notified 49 times a week, or 49 times a day on average this particular week. And so it's really interesting data.
Mine, so I'm a Samsung guy. It's very similar settings, and then there's a category called digital well-being.
Uh-huh.
And honestly, until we chatted a couple days ago, I'd never even checked this.
Yeah.
But for me, as of today, I've been on my phone for 46 minutes. Mm-hmm. I've unlocked it 32 times. And it says I've received 75 notifications, but that's weird to me because I don't have notifications turned on my phone. So I don't know what that means. Like I have
alarm or something maybe. I don't know.
I don't even know. I mean, I really don't know what that means. I think I do have notifications for my email account, and I have a little Outlook, avatar app thing pop up at the top. So maybe that's what it's saying, but maybe that's what it is. But 46 minutes, and I'll just kind of be honest, since we're going to be honest here. It appears that last week my average was 1 hour and 57 minutes on my phone.
Yeah, which is
kind of and I kind of take this personal. I almost feel like that's a bad thing.
Uh-huh.
So I'm going to justify what's going on. My email account on my Mac I can't figure out how to turn notifications on.
Yeah.
So I've got them turned on my phone. And when I see it here, I'll often check my email on my phone.
Yeah.
Because I think you can make it have a little noise or something. And I don't like the noise, so I've turned that off. But I don't even get the little button anymore, the little bat. I don't know how to do that. So it comes on so I'm just going to say that I don't like being on my phone much, and I'm a little offended that it says I was on there 2 hours a day. But that's not. That's not really true. I mean, I may be, but it's mainly it was mostly email. Yeah. According to my data, it's mostly email. And the notifications though, like that's pretty intense. So you get notifications.
And I turn off as many as I can. So it's like I'd have to go back and look where those notifications from, because I in general don't like to be notified. It's like if I want to check something, I'll check it on my own time, on schedule. But yeah, like I'm getting pinged apparently 50 times a day to, hey, come check out something that you're interested in.
There's a couple of things we talked about this the other day, but I think it's important to raise some awareness about this. And I'm going to give you a couple of articles, if you can look these up. One of them is from it's studyfinds.org. That's the website. And the article is called Missing Quarantine. 1 in 3 young people say they were happier during pandemic lockdowns. And you brought up a good point, and I'll tell you my perspective in a minute, but I think there's probably some truth to that. You and I have both heard and know this, although I don't have the data right here in front of me, that the majority of people are introverted in terms of personality types. I would probably dare say that is rather true, because people who are introverted don't necessarily, they don't see the world as extra. And I think our world is built for extroverted people. Yeah. So I'm making a generalization here, and I'm going to admit that. But as an introvert myself, I kind of understand that, or a recovering introvert, that the world is, you have to, if you're an introverted person, it takes a little more energy to interact with just a cashier, like just random things.
Oh, yeah.
So I would think that's fairly true, but I also would think that there's a flip side to that there is some normalization happening in terms of those who give us information. They're trying to normalize this idea of being alone, and being isolated and escaping. And there are some legitimate reasons why we escape. We know that. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But I think on the flip side, I think there's a little bit of that normalization. And there's another article here from The Atlantic. It's in their family section, and it's by a writer named Faith Hill.
Is that Tim McGraw's wife?
Is that a country singer?
Is that really that Faith Hill?
I don't think it's the same Faith Hill.
Gotcha.
I just kind of thought that.
Singer / sociologist.
I wouldn't say that.
Combo.
But the article is called The Nocturnals. And here's the tag. While most people are fast asleep, some ultra introverts are going about their lives. And listen to how this is couched: reveling in the quiet and solitude. Mm-hmm. They challenge a core assumption of psychology that all humans need social connection. So I've read this article because I was slightly offended, because I don't know if I'm an ultra introvert, but I tend to sway in that direction. In other words, that's not bad, by the way. That just means that you're recharged by isolation. Mm-hmm. Extroverts means that they're recharged by interaction. So neither is good or bad. There's no. We're not casting aspersions on introverts.
Yeah,
I recharge in isolation. Are you an introvert or extrovert?
I am extroverted. I've never had an invitation to go do something where I thought, nah, I think I'd rather just stay home.
Really?
I would go out as often as I'm invited to if I've got time, and I'm going to love it. Even if I'm exhausted and tired, I'm going to go because I just enjoy it, and it will energize me, actually.
Yeah, so that's the difference. So you understand that, and I understand that.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing, though, is as we're talking about this idea of escaping and leaving reality, there is this tendency in media and sociologists and in reporters to say, maybe you don't need to be around people. Maybe you need to escape more, because a lot of both of these articles rely heavily on people's interaction with technology. So it's not just that they're hanging out by themselves in their house. They are engaged and immersed in technological outputs.
Yeah, they didn't interview a bunch of monks that are in solitude.
Right.
They interviewed a bunch of people that are in their houses on technology.
That bothers me, though, a little bit, that there is this trend to normalize this behavior. Because as a student minister, so you've shared some of this. Do you see some of this destructive trend that's happening in escaping? Let's talk specifically about teenagers and specifically about their phones.
Yeah.
So let's just be real clear. Again, we're not saying it's the only way that you can escape, but from your purview, that's what you see.
Oh, yeah. And it was one of the things that it's got to be stated up front, which you never know exactly what to do with this, but there are some people that have completely isolated themselves that we just don't even know they exist. And so we're really only talking about the people that have somehow ventured out into the world enough that we've seen them, we know them, we have a relationship with them. So there's a whole other crop of people that are so extreme isolated that we just don't even know to include them in our social view of this topic because they never interacted with us for even to know that they've got that extreme view of isolation. But of the people that we get to interact with during COVID, I got to see this firsthand because my youth minister instinct, call it what you want, I think the Holy Spirit kind of gives some insights as well along the way. The longer COVID went along, the more and more I just started getting very worried about our students, because I know that for them to be around other people is a developing process of just their adolescence, but it's also how they develop spiritually. I can't tell you how many times a kid has not come to be doing something spiritual, being at church, being in a youth group, going to camps, all the things that we do as a church group. And then they'll come back, and the first thing that they say is like, I just realized I needed this, and I had just been avoiding it for X reason. So I've had that experience before COVID hit. So when COVID happens and we don't have the chance to do anything together, I know that this is how some people are going to be feeling no matter what. And the proof was in the pudding for me, just on a microcosm of First Calling Church of Christ. Whenever we finally started meeting, we met out in the courtyard so that we could still be outdoors. When we first started meeting, we had every single number of kid coming back on Wednesday night that we did before COVID. Like, there was zero drop-off of people that were like, yeah, I just don't know if I want to come. Now, there were individuals that still made that choice, I know, and we were super patient, and people had to do what they needed to do, but it wasn't like no, I got used to this, and I kind of like this thing, and I want to keep it this way. My experience with the students was they really, really needed it. They felt that they needed it, and they have wanted it ever since we've come back. The momentum started from day one, and it hasn't stopped, So I do think that there's a group of people that we've probably just missed. I don't know if the parable of the missing sheep applies here. We're going to find the one that's walked off. I think there's some application to that. But I think the average person, like, they instinctually know, like, I need to be around people, and I got tired of the isolation.
So connection is important.
Yeah.
It is, and we know that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that introverts who aren't there all the time need to be there all the time. I mean, there are some legitimate, and in fact, for someone like me who's recharged in isolation, sometimes I don't want to be a part of a big group. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's a little intimidating. So I think it's fair to say for both that, but we'll talk about this in a minute too. Scripturally, there's a push toward togetherness and connection. Mm-hmm. Connection's important, regardless of how you find yourself on the scale of connection. If you're an introvert and you want to make your determination, if it's once a month or once, I'm good, or if you're an extrovert and you want to do more than once a week. Yeah. So in other words, I think that's a very personal, sort of physiological way that we're built and designed. But I think we've determined that connection is important. We know that. We're pastors, we're ministers, we understand that. But my fear is that societally normalizing isolation can only have bad negative effects in the future. I don't think that's a good thing. Yeah. Even for introverts, I think that we have to be able to say, no, we have to stop here. You said something too, that students who do find themselves in experiences and they come back later and they've avoided it. Mm-hmm. There are probably some legitimate reasons for avoidance. Number one, well, actually there probably are a couple. There are some legitimate reasons, but I think there are some illegitimate reasons too. Like, we're just escaping, we're getting away. But the legitimate reasons, and I wrote this down, is that sometimes escapism or avoidance of those things is actually a symptom of trauma and a symptom of hurt. And I say that from personal experience. The story I told at the first of this conversation of streaming a show on my tablet was a way to not think about what was actually going on in my life. I could completely disengage and avoid it, because being alone with my thoughts was a killer. It was not good. And now, older and wiser, I understand that I was not in a good mentally healthy spot there. Yeah. I had some trauma, and I didn't know how to deal with that, and I didn't know exactly how to process that So what I did was I just plugged my buds in and turned the show on.
Oh yeah, and I think that's the common experience throughout history. So the theological foundation in my mind of this topic that makes I feel very sensitive and sympathetic towards all of our ways that we escape. We live in a fallen world. If you love this place, like you're not seeing it for what it really is the implication we get from Scripture. He says, love God and don't love this world. And so I don't want to overstate the word trauma and what that means, because there's some specific ways that we talk about that usually. But can it be fair to say that no one gets to go through this world without having an experience that says, I don't want to be here anymore. I would like to be in a different scenario or escape this. I mean, theologically speaking, I plan to be a eternal escapist, and I'm going to leave this place because I don't like it, and I'm going to be with Jesus in heaven forever. Like, that's what I've hitched my wagon to. And so I'm not surprised at all when I see trends within myself or other people that say, like, yeah, I too don't want to be in the reality of this world. And so the question becomes not, do you want to be in this world that's fallen? Nobody really wants to. But if we can't really get out of it completely, if we have to go to a virtual place to escape it, is that really what's best? Is that really what God would have of us? And so that's getting to a deeper question. I don't think it's as simple as this place is bad, so I'm going to justify escaping. Because you could look at the phone as this super easy device and say, wow, I could entertain myself and escape this world for hours at a time just by 10 seconds, getting to the right app. Well, why isn't this just the greatest development in the history of mankind? If we have all wanted to escape throughout history, because it's not just phones, you go back, and the thing before phones was TV, and the thing before TV was radio, and things before radio was reading novels. I read an article the other day. There was a historical piece saying, did you know that at one point parents were saying that they were very concerned about the large quantities of time that their kids were escaping the real world into the world of puzzles? They were spending their time putting puzzles together. And it was the exact same things that we would hear our adult kind of looking at the younger generation saying, I don't want you to go spend so much time on your phone. Instead, go read a book. Well, the previous generation said, I don't want you to spend so much time reading a book because that's not a real world. You need to go outside and play. And in my mind, I'm like, do you know what kids do when they go outside and play? They pretend they're in another world. So it's like, it doesn't matter what generation it's been. We all find our ways to escape because this world is hard. And so we have to find another reason to engage in it besides that we like it. Because it's not that this place is so grand that you should just want to be in it. You got to have an alternative reason. And I think that's where Jesus comes in, and he gives us that purpose of why we would stop being just pure escapists and do something different.
And I think for us and for for you listening, I think there's a legitimate moment where we have to ask ourselves, why am I escaping here?
Yeah.
What is pushing me to political issues, but what's pushing me to spend an inordinate amount of time on TikTok?
Uh-huh.
How many different ways can you find someone to dance?
Many.
I mean, seriously. I'm not, that sounds really kind of archaic, but
yeah.
What keeps me here? Why do I spend so much time on Instagram? What is pushing, not what the attraction of Instagram or TikTok, what's driving me there?
Yes.
I think that's really what we need to, we really need to answer that. And that's a, not we as in me and you, but why are we escaping? And I want to kind of insert here, because I like what you said. We are really eternal escapists. Mm-hmm. I think that is incredibly astute and very powerful to note that there is nothing here that's worth staying for or living in forever.
Yeah.
And it is fallen. In fact, Paul writes in Romans that all of creation groans for the renewal of the heavens and the earth. I mean, the very creation itself, the deterioration of stuff and things and the natural world is evidence that this is not an eternal place. It's not a place that will constantly satisfy urges. And that's theological, but it's true. I mean, I think about that a lot. But this idea of what's pushing us, I think we really need to make sure that everyone knows, especially if you are within a driving distance of where we are. We're at the First Colony Church here in Sugar Land, Texas. That it might be time for some self-inventory. is there some trauma that needs to be dealt with in my life?
Yeah.
We can help you do that. We want you to contact us. You can contact me or Kevin. We can just email us if you want. My email is kyles@firstcolonychurch.org.
Mine's Kevin P. at the same firstcolonychurch.org.
Yeah, I don't really know our phone number, but you can call us if you want. But any of those, we can find ways to help you deal with emotional baggage, emotional trauma, mental trauma, because I think, again, personal experience, that's what pushed me to do this initially. It wasn't the attraction of the show House. It was what I was leaving that I didn't want to deal with.
I mean, that was my question when you were describing House. I'm sure it's a great show, but I was like, how is that a bingeable show? It's about a doctor, and maybe I'm just underselling the show, but I was wondering that. But
it's a good show.
You're making the great point that it's like, it's really not the show. It's not 24. It's not House. It's that I would like to not be over here, and this is a place that I can go that gives me temporary peace from what's over there, and I really, really enjoy that temporary peace.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the best show ever. Just something I didn't watch, and it was available on Netflix at the time. So
yeah.
And all 9 seasons or whatever were. It's a medical mystery show, Kevin.
Gotcha. Okay,
that's what it is.
Yeah,
I'm not recommending it. I'm not endorsing it, but that's what I did. But I think it's okay for us to say, what's driving us here? Yeah. What's driving us to political subjects? What's driving us to being sports fanatics? Yeah. What's driving us to constantly checking our stocks and our stock market and our gains and our losses? What's driving us to constantly be on TikTok or DM on Instagram? I mean, I think there is something to that, and I think that we have to personally, I have to answer that. You have to answer this. We have to, because Jesus is really the ultimate satisfaction, and maybe if that, and I don't want to be pedantic with this, but if maybe we're short selling Jesus here some.
Yeah.
I mean, and maybe those of you who are listening, Jesus has been short sold to you. I mean, you've not been discipled well, and you've not understood the satisfaction that comes from following Jesus, but also the difficulty of following Jesus, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we have to be honest that life is tough and it's hard, and it's not often a place where we want to be.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I was thinking about it is I can so easily identify why people escape. And so the variety of it, maybe you got a different flavor of escapism than me, but I get why we do it. And so really what I have been chewing on, and I suppose what I'm proposing, is a gamble. Because to go to Jesus for satisfaction, why would you do that when you've got a phone at your fingertips? Why would you do that when you can binge other stuff? Why would you do that when you can escape in a lot of ways that you have learned over the years to do? And to me, it's that we have this gamble of trading temporary peace that comes from our escapist habits and trading that over for like the prospect. And I'll even say the scary prospect, because there's no guarantees at the beginning steps of this, that what if facing whatever issues you've got in your life, whatever traumas have happened, facing your responsibilities, facing the relationships, what if facing those things with God might actually bring a more lasting peace than the temporary one that comes from escapism? And the reason we go to escapism is because it's guaranteed in the instant. Now, I'm going to have to come back to those other things later on, and it becomes a problem if they begin to build up. But like, that's the gamble that I'm recommending based on my own life, is that, I have actually found that when I face things with God, I'm much more satisfied than when I have just escaped. In fact, the escapism can get boring at times, And so that's the thing that I've come to a place on, is it feels like a gamble, but what I would say is I think it's a worthwhile gamble,
Yeah, the world makes a lot of promises it can't keep.
Yeah.
And that is true for any of the ways that we escape. And I think it's okay to say this. We're not necessarily negatively talking about entertainment.
Yeah.
I like being entertained.
Yeah.
I'm a reader. I like reading. I like watching some things when I get a chance, but I'm not, I don't, and I think, of course, Jesus at the wedding party in Cana, here's a guy who miraculously creates more wine from the water so the party can continue.
Yeah.
I think we follow the Son of God who liked to be entertained. Luke 15 says that he was a host for parties that welcomed sinners. So, I mean, can you imagine the coolness of that? I mean, Jesus opens up his doors. All the people that were, that was my water bottle, by the way. I'm getting really excited because I love talking about this. That all these people who were on the fringes of society are welcomed to a meal in Jesus's house or the home where he's living.
Yeah.
Can you imagine just the bonkers atmosphere there? I mean, in other words, we're not saying entertainment is bad.
Yeah.
We're not even saying political avenues are bad to follow. We're not saying those things, but we are saying, why are we running to those instead of running to Jesus? I think that's, if we're going to kind of tie a bow on it, that's kind of where we are.
The litmus test of whether something is godly or not is God the one that's led you into it or not? Because there's so many things that the only thing that Satan can do is pervert the good that God has made. And so by that standard, there's a lot of things that you might end up doing that are without God, that had they been done with God, they would have been the most amazing experience ever. You know, the example of Jesus at the party is an example. Well, Jesus was there, so that's where I'm going to be at, you know. And so I believe that, you know, God says you're going to rest one day of the week. I mean, how many families do you know that are like, you say, how was your weekend? And the answer was busy. Say, oh, well, so you didn't rest, apparently. And, you know, if Jesus was resting one day a week and I didn't rest, well, that means that I wasn't with Jesus for that day. And so I'm in agreement with you that the problem is not entertainment or, the problem is not entertainment. The problem is escapism. Because if you go entertain yourself and you're going along with Jesus and the pace of life that his Spirit is leading you, well, that's the rejuvenation that we actually need. The problem that I see in my life is, you know, I don't want to talk to Jesus about what I go do for however many hours it is when I'm escaping. And admittedly, it ends up not being spiritually refreshing or recreation of that. And so with all things in life, you want to come to a place of saying, is this what God is leading me to do? And if it's not, well, then the danger you have to have is, well, am I just doing this of my own will? And therefore, there's nothing spiritually significant about it. And so escapism would be the problem, not necessarily entertainment.
So you said earlier, and I like your phrase, that it is a gamble.
Mm-hmm.
I think as we kind of wrap up our conversation here, I think we need to speak some truth into this conversation from the word of the Lord, because it is a gamble, but we would be remiss to just say, you know, GL, good luck. Hope everything's okay. You know, get off your phone, go back to your trauma. It's all going to be fun, because that's not true.
No.
So I think maybe as we kind of wrap this up, you're going to share something from Scripture, and I'm going to share something, because I think it's important that people know that the answer, the solid truth of these things can be found in Scripture, because we follow a living Savior, a living Jesus, who as Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews says, is the author and the perfecter of our faith. He nuances our faith. He forms our faith. Sometimes that's not always fun, but it is true. So if we're going to be honest about what's driving us or making us escape, what do we do to not escape? How do we answer that?
Yeah, I'm actually going to read something from another place in Hebrews, and this is kind of the end of the paragraph of the famous passage that says, endure hardship as discipline. And the end of it has got a really awesome nugget to it that applies to what we're talking about when it comes to, are we going to just escape from our problems, or are we going to take the gamble of, I'm going to face those problems with God and have a healthy dose of resting with God? That would be the ideal thing. Hebrews 12:11 says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time. Nobody wants to face their problems, I think is what this is saying. Everybody would prefer just to escape their problems. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. And so I think what this is saying in our context of escapism versus facing the things that are actually in our life that need facing, it's saying, I know that it is going to be hard. It is not going to be pleasant. It will be painful. But there is something worthwhile on the other side. So you made the point of, I didn't necessarily feel bad about playing Madden for 30 seasons through, but there wasn't anything to show for it at the end. except for time that you got to step outside of whatever was going on in your life. Well, what this verse is promising us is, but there's something that's a net positive that could come from actually doing this, of facing our problems, though they are painful. And I wanted to offer up an article that might be food for thought to continue on past this conversation. Henry Nouwen is a pretty great author, and he wrote an article. You could Google it. It's just 3 words: Solitude Community Ministry. And he talks about Jesus' life as a pattern for our life. And so he takes this passage from Matthew, and he says, we see Jesus spend time alone with God. And then literally a couple verses after, it says, and then he went and he gathered his disciples together. And then a couple verses later it says, and then they went out and they ministered together. He was solitude with God, community with other people that had also spent time in solitude with God. And then they went out and ministered to people that had not spent time in solitude with God. And he said the order of those things matters greatly. And I think that's the application here, is so many times I would prefer just to escape that whole process, not spend time with God or God's people that he loves that don't know him yet. I would rather just escape my problems. And what Jesus is showing is that our life is going to be found, our satisfaction, our purpose is going to be found in this pattern of solitude community ministry. So I read the article probably 10 times in my life, and I feel like it refreshes me every time I read it. So I'm given a 3 stars out of 3 stars to go read that one.
I like the middle component of gathering with people. This is even to us introverts in the world, that there is a scriptural pattern to connection and to the benefit of being with believers and followers of Jesus. I think a lot of us might spend a lot of time with people who don't love Jesus. But there is a really good, wholesome, needed, necessary, urgent blessing to being with people who are following Jesus. In 1 Corinthians 12, this is where I get this. Listen to what Paul writes. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but the same God works all of them in all people. Now, listen to verse 7. Now, to each one of these people, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. That word manifestation actually means in the original language to be made visible. It's not an ethereal experience. It's not something you imagine. It's not something you dream. That being with people, in other words, jettisoning our escapism and being connected with people who follow Jesus results in a visible reality of the presence of God. And again, it's what I said earlier. I think a lot of us have been short-sold Jesus and short-sold what it means to be with people who follow Jesus. Have we ever truly considered this experiential moment of being with believers in this moment and being able to see God? I mean, the reality of that statement is so profound to me. For those of us that think that Paul was not a smart individual or not in touch, Paul makes a statement that for those of you who are worried that you can't see God, why don't you hang out with people who also follow Jesus? And then you're going to see God in the mosaic of those people.
Oh, yeah.
So in other words, while we desperately want people to find counseling and help and in a way to deal with trauma, there are also those of us who are escaping who don't have trauma. We just don't want to deal anymore. We just want to walk away. I think Paul offers a better alternative, that being and engaging with people in this moment, coming back from the escapism, whatever that is, putting the phones down, laying the political arguments down, walking away from ESPN, finding ourselves in this community of people can result in a very miraculous view of God that we don't really see anywhere else. I think we are built for the miraculous. We are built to see these things. Our cell phones are miraculous devices. I mean, honestly, we can access information from all over the world. We are trending toward an immediate miracle. But I think the alternative that Scripture offers is there's the presence of God that supersedes whatever it is we're trying to escape too.
Yeah.
And I like what your middle component is. It's the solitude with God, and then it's the gathering of people for mission. Paul continues in this passage with what he calls grace gifts. They're gifts of grace. But really, in the way that this passage works, that doesn't necessarily mean these are once for all gifts. This is just what happens in the moment, that God is so ever present that even in this moment, this is what the Lord will look like. But in a different moment with different groups of people, all following Jesus, the manifestation of the Spirit's going to look different. Can you imagine the like, I don't mean to be all kind of preachy, but this idea of a notification on our phone. Can you imagine what need can be satisfied in this physical manifestation of God that a notification and a ding can't do?
Oh, yeah.
It's phenomenal to me. It's absolutely phenomenal. I think we've had a good talk today.
Yeah, this is awesome.
It's been pretty good. I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank Kevin for joining me. It took some time out of your day and some time out of your month. We've kind of thought about this for the past month. Mm-hmm. So I am very appreciative of that. For those of you who are listening, I would challenge you to share this with somebody. Text it right now, however you're listening. And at the expense of undoing everything we said, subscribe to this and get a notification for this. Isn't that awful? But we appreciate our listeners, and I think there's some goodness here and certainly a way to find the Lord, even in a podcast. So thanks, Kevin, for joining me. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you on AnchorPoint next time. Say bye.
Adios. Have a great day, guys.